I was a member of WDFF from 1996 to 1999 when I was principal at Drummond School in Southland, which of course was the predecessor to Rural Women, and I bet there's some of you remember when it was WDFF. And I had an absolute ball, and it was one of the best things that I could do to integrate into the community, and I loved being a member of such a fantastic organisation. So there you go, there's something that's not there on Google, but I do like to say that it's wonderful being here with you, because I really value and honour your organisation and what you do for rural women and to empower rural women. I also would like to acknowledge today my colleague Angie Warren-Clark up the back here, who is the Labour List MP based in Bay of Plenty electorate, but also Sarah Pallett, who is from Ilam in Christchurch, is our MP from Ilam, who was a midwife and has worked as a rural midwife. So I know that something that's really important to rural women is women's health, and somebody that you could talk to is Sarah, because she is passionate about women's health. So yes, if you've got something you want to lobby or talk to about, she's your person to go to there. And she's an amazing person, and we're very grateful that she's a member of our caucus. Look, congratulations too on the International Day of Rural Women. It's great to be here to celebrate this really good day with you. One of the things that I know is that rural women are, it sounds a bit cliche, but you are the backbone of the rural sector, and I know that when I grew up rurally, but it wasn't really, we weren't involved rurally at that stage, but I did grow up in rural Christchurch. But my first job was in the rural areas, and I stayed right in rural areas right through until 2006 when I moved here to be principal at Maryvale. So I've been principal of 3 rural schools that were the heart and soul of the school, and I got to know, the people that I got to know the most were the women, because they were the ones that were not only working in their jobs or on their farms, they were also running the household. They were the main caregivers for the children that I had the honour of having at my schools, and they were the voices, and they made those communities hum. So I'm just so excited to be here with you today to celebrate this very special day. I also want to acknowledge the work that you do and have done over many generations in nurturing the young people in the rural communities. I've seen women who have been amazing at nurturing the potential and the skills and raising the awareness for those young people of how they can make their life a career within the rural sector, so that they had goals and dreams, but they never felt that they had to shift away, because the women were really good at helping nurture the skills and talents of those young people. So I really want to say thank you for that, because I believe we're at a point in time at the moment where the food and fibre sector are so crucially important to us and to our economy, that it's critical that we've got young people that are seeing that as a career going forward. So thank you for the work that you're doing in nurturing those young people and their hopes and dreams in being able to contribute through our rural sector. The other thing that I'd like to say is that it is a real treat to be here in person. I'm just had it, Paula was saying on the way in, I'm grateful that we're not in Auckland, and I'm sorry for all our Auckland people and friends and families. I have 2 sons that live in Auckland, and I'm missing them dearly at the moment, and it's really tough. But I'm taking every opportunity that I can have to meet in person, and it's wonderful to be here. And thank you for keeping this event going, because too many events at the moment are being postponed or cancelled. And a lot of my time at the moment and events that I'm speaking to at the moment, I'm doing over Zoom or I'm doing videos, and it's really nice to not be looking at a screen and to be looking at real people. I know it's real people on Zoom too, but sometimes it doesn't feel like it. Sometimes you just don't get that energy that you have in a room like this one. So thanks, Mary, and your team for keeping it going here today. I really appreciate that. But I do want to say that because you are so instrumental in your communities and you are leaders in your communities, it would be remiss of me not to say that tomorrow is Super Saturday for our vaccination drive, and even if you are fully vaccinated, your job is not done. If you know anybody that has not had a vaccination, then encourage them to get out and have their vaccination, and be a soft encouragement. You don't have to be a hard encouragement, but the way we get back to freedom is to see this drive through and to get up to that 90% and beyond. So there's my plug for the day. I know that you're going to be discussing environmental topics here today. I'm just going to do a big shout out for Angie and the work that she does in our caucus around environmental issues. I said Sarah's your health person, Angie's your environmental person, so if you've got anything that you want to say in the environmental area to get back to our caucus, then Angie's your person to go and have those conversations with. Right, you've asked me to talk about how we're working with rural women in the government, and of course I am Minister for Women, and I have a close relationship with your national organisation. I meet with NACU, which is the National Advisory Council for Employment for Women, of which you have Angela from your national office sits on NACU and brings the voice of rural women to that table all the time. And I have to say, do a big shout out for Angela, because when we're having conversations, there's always that little voice it's not little, she's quite forceful, so yeah. She says, what about rural? What are you doing for rural? And I really appreciate that, because sometimes you can get captured by the majority of people there, and I will say that the majority of people in that organisation and in the room do come from an urban background, so it's really important that we've got that voice saying, so what does that mean for rural? We know that in the COVID-19 pandemic that things have not been easy, including for the rural sector as well. Even though the rural sector has been so important to the rebuild in our economy and have been able to keep going. In fact, I've got my closest friend is a farmer. Her and her husband farm in Southland, and she said there were times that she didn't even realise that the rest of the country were in lockdown because they just kept going. But it's still not easy, because she had her kids at home, and she was the number one caregiver and the number one teacher, and she had to go out and do all the other things on the farm as well. So it's not easy for her, but she said we kind of kept going, the farm kept going, but she realised how hard of a job it is for the women in times like that as well. But the resilience that the rural sector shows is the resilience that we need to have as a country as well, across the whole of our country. The rural sector shows a great resilience. I say that because I know that it's not easy in the rural sector. I know that many of you who come from a farming background or horticulture background, you rely on things like weather all the time. You rely on things that are outside of your control quite often, but you just keep going. And that's really important. That's what we need as a country. I'm just going to say this, I do worry about mental health sometimes in that attitude, and I think that it gets harder and harder all the time. And I think we need to be really aware, and I know that the rural sector are starting to have more open conversations about mental health as well, and how we need to support people in their mental health. So I don't underestimate the burdens that you may be facing, but I honour you for those and for the resilience that you have shown, and I think it's been a leading way of what we need to be showing across the whole of the economy. I also want to acknowledge that last year rural women were received grants from the Ministry for Women's COVID-19 Community Fund, and they use that for training in mental health interventions to help people cope with traumatic events, which is why I know those conversations are happening around mental health. I launched another fund just recently to support vulnerable women through the latest period of lockdowns, and we know that there's always more applications than what we have funding for, so I'm really grateful for your past president, Fiona Gower, for again being on the panel that reviews those applications, and she's going through that process right at the moment, so I'm really, really happy that we've got someone with her talents and skills there. I think Fiona is an amazing person. So I've talked about as a local, I'm so aware of what rural people bring to the New Zealand economy. I want to talk a little bit about what that means locally. It was just this week, 2 days ago, that I was down in Te Puke, or just south of Te Puke, visiting with the Seeka head officers and talking there about what women do in horticulture, and people were very excited about the role of women in horticulture and how we're seeing this growing number of women in horticulture. But the question that I then went on to ask is, so how many of those women translate to leadership in horticulture? And that's another story, because we have, I think it's growing up over 50% now of the workforce in horticulture are women, but we've got less than 25% in leadership positions. And to me, that's not okay, because our girls that are coming through and seeing a career in the rural sector, if they don't see it, they can't be it. So if they can't see that there's a leadership pathway for them, it's much harder for them to follow that leadership pathway and to break through that glass ceiling. So I think that that's a goal for us, particularly here locally, is to encourage more of our young women and women into leadership positions within the rural sector, within the horticulture sector particularly, because that's what's growing here in this part of the economy, in this part of locally. We know that there's been a disproportionate impact on women in this country after COVID. So COVID is a labour market shock, and we know that in any labour market shock there has been a disproportionate impact on women. Women are more likely to lose their jobs, and did straight after COVID. More women are likely to go from full-time to part-time hours, and did after COVID, by quite a big percentage. More women can't progress in their employment because they've got barriers such as childcare that they can't overcome. And it is no different in the rural sector to what it is in the urban sector. So we've done a breakdown. I got my Ministry for Women to have a look and see, is there a difference? Are women more successful in the rural sector at these times than they are in the urban sector? No, it's exactly the same. Women are just as disproportionately impacted in that area to what they are in the urban sector. So I get a bit frustrated with that. We know from history that in every labour market shock that women have been disproportionately impacted with their employment. So if we know that, what have we done to change that? And why is that still happening? So I've asked my ministry to go away and do some work around that, and they came back and said, we know that we need to have an employment action plan. There were 6 other employment action plans in this country. They were for Māori, Pacific, disabled, youth, seniors and ethnic communities. But women didn't have one. And so I went to my colleagues and I asked, why do women not have an action plan? And they said, they can come under every single one of the other action plans. And I didn't think that was good enough. I thought women needed their own action plan, because otherwise you risk that women become a tick box. So when people say, well, what are you doing for women? And they say, oh yeah, we've got that over there, we've ticked that. But we're not really looking at the real issues that impact on all women across the board. So I'm pretty lucky because the Prime Minister was on board with the fact when I said that we needed another employment action plan, and she agreed with me, and so we've started to develop our own women's employment action plan. I will say that we're a bit ahead of where some of the others are at because women get things done. And so we are a little bit ahead, and we're going to have we do have a draft action plan that's going to Cabinet in a couple of weeks' time, and then we're going to bring that back out for consultation, and we will be very early in 2022 having the final version of our action plan. We will be ahead of 3 others who have not completed theirs. As I say, women get things done. That will have, a big part of that will be looking at what's happening for rural women and the barriers that rural women face and what can we do to mitigate that. Some of the actions that we're looking at is that we are looking at how we might be able to run some programs to encourage women into leadership in the rural areas. These are maybes that could come through consultation. But those sort of areas, identifying the barriers that women face and how can we overcome those barriers so that next time we get to another labour market shock, and there will be another one. The last one we had in this country was the global financial crisis and the Christchurch earthquakes, so we do get them. There will be another one. I don't want to see women in the same position that they were in from this pandemic and where they've been in every other labour market shock. It's time that we stood up and said enough is enough, and that we are not being disproportionately impacted. So that's where I'm working at from in the women's employment area. But at the same time, as I was looking into this, I also realised it's been 2004 since we've had a national plan for women in this country. And again, there are lots of areas where women put up with the fact that they're not progressing at the same rate as our male counterparts. And don't get me wrong, I think it's wonderful. Men do a wonderful job. But women are not achieving at the same level. We have greater levels of domestic violence. We've got our own health issues, and I really appreciate the work that rural women are doing in the health area. We have our own health issues. I've talked about employment. We're not getting into leadership at the same levels. We only have one private company in this country that has a woman CEO and a woman chair of the board that's listed on the NZSX, and that's Spark. Only one out of all of those other companies. We say we're equal, but actually there's a long way to go before we get there. We're a lot better. We're getting a lot better, and that mantra of girls can do anything, I'm starting to believe it more and more. But we've still got some way to go. And I still think that there is room for New Zealand to have a national plan for women so that we can overcome some of these obstacles and hurdles, and that we can have more of a strategic focus around women's health. And so I can talk about this, but it hasn't been agreed with Cabinet. And the reason I can talk about it is that I took it to Cabinet in March to say, can I do some groundwork on looking into a national plan for women? CEDAW, which is the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women from the United Nations, recommended that New Zealand had a national plan a few years ago, and rural women are right on board with that as well. So Cabinet agreed, and next month I'm going to be taking a paper back to Cabinet to say that we're recommending, after doing some work, that we're going to have, we need a new national plan, and that we're going to be looking into it. So watch this space, and rural women, I expect you to be a big part of helping us develop that national plan for women, because I think it's not okay that it's nearly 20 years since we've had our last one. I know I focused a lot on women's employment today, but I want to assure you that the Ministry and I are actively involved in promoting women's interests in other policy areas, including health and education, and that will come through very much so in the National Plan. If I can get it across the line, I'm positive I can get across the line. We, as a ministry and as Minister, I strive to put a gender lens over everything. I've really realised how much I did that prior to coming into this role, but as Minister for Women, I realise how much I do put a gender lens over everything that I do. As you know, there's important changes ahead for this country. You know, COVID-19 has been the biggest disruption that we have seen in this country for a long time. But I'm very much a positive person. I believe that with every disruption comes opportunity, but we have to grab that opportunity and we have to grab it really hard and not lose it. I call it the window. We have to jump through the window before it closes. I really want to take this opportunity of this disruption to ensure that we're putting women at the centre of our recovery and putting women right where they need to be to ensure that we're going to have a really strong recovery. And rural women are a huge, big part of that. Together I know that we can continue New Zealand's legacy of championing women, making progress towards achieving better outcomes for women and girls, and increasing diversity and representation in all sectors. Rural New Zealand is and will remain an essential part of the economic and social fabric of our country. I'm humbled by your long-standing tradition of kindness. I know it, I remember it well, and I'm grateful for you and the work that you do. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.